listening to WTMFI 67.42 FM Chicago.
Good evening, all you weird and wonderful beings, and welcome to WTMFI 67.42 FM Chicago. This is TJ Fanpool, aka Turbo GJ, reporting to you live on TikTok. Tonight, WTMFI is your resource for Star Wars Facts of the Day Weekly Review. During the week, we bring you a Star Wars fact Monday through Friday. Then on Sunday, we do a live review of all the facts, bringing you all the information we have researched from StarWars.com and Wikipedia.com. I hope you will stick with us through this show and take part in the chat at the end. Now, a little bit about your host, me. I'm a diehard Star Wars fan, but not just the movies of the original trilogy. I've been following Star Wars since I was a kid, starting with the original trilogy, but I didn't lose that interest at the end. My passion for Star Wars made it part of my whole self, and I fueled that with books, comics, and reading with the while expanding my knowledge and lore of the Star Wars universe. And thank you for those who came in tonight. I really appreciate it. I do apologize that I'm not wearing my Star Wars gear right now. My AC is still out. We've been getting contact with HVAC companies to get it repaired, and unfortunately we have to get it fully replaced, so it will be some time before my house is actually cool. Thankfully, the temperature right now is in the 70s in Chicago, so it's semi-okay, and we've got fans and stuff going through our house, basically trying to keep the place cool, but it is still surprisingly hot. So I'm trying to keep myself cool as best I can with airflow and fans and stuff. So I apologize that I can't wear the stuff that I wear. Everything I have is cotton-based. Nothing is wickwear. This is the one of the few wickwear things I have. So sorry that I can't do a full display. But, hey, I've always got my gunk. He's always right here with me, as well as the Star Wars sign. So I could always just, hold this, and maybe that would help out, make this more of that. But unfortunately, I kind of like to use my hands, so I don't want to hold this the whole time. But so this week with Star Wars Fact of the Day, I decided that because Mandalorian and Grogu came out, I want to really focus on that. Our AC's messed up last summer. We bought 4 of these portable. Oh, okay. Yeah, we were actually thinking about possibly picking up temporary ones. Unfortunately, the cost of getting the temporary ones for the smaller ones for rooms and stuff like that was going to be too costly. And the thing is that we were hoping to get this fixed, last week. Unfortunately, things didn't work out so well, so we've gone a little longer. The unfortunate thing is the temperature is supposed to go up this week, so we're hoping that we finally narrowed it down to the HVAC company that's going to be able to give us the best price, so we're going to move forward with them. We just have to get the scheduling part done. Unfortunately, we weren't able to get the schedule in on the weekend, so hopefully, cross the fingers, we'll actually have AC sometime this week, which would be wonderful. And then, of course, we'll have the bills for the next 18 months. So highs and lows, positives, negatives with everything, as long as we're cool, and, that's the main thing. So as I was saying, this week with Facts of the Day, I decided to do Mandalorian and Grogu. Since it came out, I wanted to focus the facts a little bit around ones that I have not covered yet, but were specifically connected to the Mandalorian and Grogu franchise that is currently going with Star Wars, and is one of the more popular ones. And I personally saw the movie. I'm not going to give anything away because I know there's probably still people that haven't watched it yet. I know there's probably a lot of reactors that are waiting for it to come on Disney Plus, and they're going to do a full reaction then, which I feel such sympathy for those guys for being able to avoid all the spoilers and stuff like that. I know there's going to be a few out there who are doing it. It's going to be really cool to see some of the reactions to the movie, but I know there's going to be a lot of people that are going to go and see it in the theater, so I'm not sure how many reactions we're going to get. But I know I have been chatting with a few friends that I know that have seen the movie. They've absolutely loved it, and we love chatting about it. And I've got the facts already lined up for next week. I'm gonna be talking about each of the facts that I covered this week, but I've already got ones loaded up for next week, and they're all related to the Mandalorian and Grogu, or specifically the Mandalorian TV series. But I'm gonna tag a few things in it that semi-relates, but I'm not going to give away stuff on my facts. Not until when Mandalorian Grogu comes out on Disney Plus, and I know that everybody can watch the movie and stuff like that, then I'm going to start splurging and stuff like that and going on about how much I love certain scenes and stuff like that. So I'll have a lot of fun with that. Too bad we aren't closer. I'd let you borrow ours. I'd appreciate that. The good thing is that our car AC works. The wind has been blowing, so we have ventilation and stuff like that. Worst comes to worst, we can always walk over to the local library and stuff like that. So we at least have access to AC. And thankfully, the job I work at has AC. My wife's job has AC. My kid is going to be hanging out with friends who have AC. So at least in that aspect, the only time we really have to worry about it is when we're obviously at home and going to sleep at night. Thankfully, we've all figured out ways to keep ourselves cool. So anyway, enough about me. Let's get into what everybody actually came tonight for, is the facts. So let's move on to the Star Wars fact of the day. Let me get started with the very first fact. So let's go through the facts of the day for this week. Star Wars fact of the day: The Mandalorian. The character of Din Djarin is a collaborative effort. While Pedro Pascal provides the voice and unmasked acting, the physical presence of the suit is Barry Lowen, Brendan Wayne, and Lateef Crowder. Because Din Djarin rarely removes his helmet, Jon Favreau and Lucasfilm production team utilized multiple performers to ensure the character always looked fluid and highly capable. The actors closely coordinate to establish consistent mannerisms so the character moves identically whether Pascal, Lowen, Wayne, or Crowder is in the armor. Barry Lowen contributed as a primary stunt double and stunt performer, particularly in the early seasons. Lateef Crowder, an expert martial artist and a stuntman who takes over for the heavy combat sequences, acrobatics, and hand-to-hand fight scenes. He is highly skilled in capoeira and jiu-jitsu. Brendan Wayne, known primarily as the main suit actor and body double, he handles the everyday physical performances of the character, including walking, holding Grogu, Baby Yoda, and standard weapon handling. As the grandson of legendary Western actor John Wayne, he helped craft the character's gunslinger-inspired movements. The collaborative physical acting in the Star Wars franchise is well documented. In fact, the physical performers have recently received highly visible on-screen recognition, with Wayne and Crowder officially billed alongside Pedro Pascal in the cinematic release of The Mandalorian and Grogu. So I honestly had gotten so much into the lore of The Mandalorian, I had not done as much research into the behind the scenes. So I am glad to admit this, but I feel a little ashamed about it that I did not know that Brendan Wayne was John Wayne's grandson. That is so freaking cool. And the really interesting thing for me is I watched a lot of John Wayne movies when I was a kid. One of the first John Wayne movies I ever saw in my life was The Cowboys, which is, this is something, and I'm sorry if this is going to spoil it for you guys, but you should definitely go see this movie because it was the first John Wayne I ever saw. It is basically about a cattle rancher who has lost all of his hands, and he's looking for people to help him drive the cattle. Now, unfortunately, this is during or just after one of the Western Wars. They go into the details on it at the beginning of the movie, but nobody is available to go with him on this trip. So he has to hire a bunch of teenagers and junior high kids, like really young kids that he has to hire to actually help him drive the cattle. So he literally has to train these kids on how to saddle, how to rope, how to do everything that a cowboy has to be able to do. So the reason why I bring this up is because I had not really noticed until I recently went back and started rewatching The Mandalorian, because I wanted to see some of these mannerisms myself and actually really verify it. And I was pleasantly surprised to notice that Brendan Wayne did a fantastic job on Mando's swagger. I had not really noticed it before, but I went back and actually watched a couple of scenes from some of John Wayne's movies where he's kind of walking out, and I could see that in Mando. And I thought that was so cool. And I always had wondered about, because I figured Pedro Pascal wasn't doing all the stunts and stuff like that. I knew that from the get-go, that obviously stunt guys were doing that, because I'm familiar with Hollywood and I know how that all works. But I figured he was doing some of it, because he is on set and he's doing the voice. So obviously, in order for it to work right, the guys would have to coordinate that. Jade, welcome in. And I really thought it was interesting as I started delving back into it. The really cool thing is that I actually got to see Brendan and Lateef on the behind the scenes that were done in Disney Plus, the gallery of The Mandalorian. The first season had a bunch of episodes, but season 2 and season 3 only had, instead of multiple shorts, they had a whole, like, almost hour-long behind the scenes, which I thought was so informative. And I really enjoyed watching, especially season 3, because there was so much more detail that went into the story. And it was just really wonderful to actually see everybody that was involved in it. And especially, I hate it when this happens. I had the name in my head. I was literally about to say it, and it just slipped out of my head. And I'm going to kill myself with this frustration. Oh, the frustration is going to kill me. The actor who played Greef Karga, I literally had his name in my head, and it just slipped out. It's unfortunately test anxiety. I'm doing this, and of course, my stress has caused my memory to blank on me. So anyway, he's part of the final behind the scenes where he describes the way he was doing the directing and stuff like. Because he actually directs several episodes, and one of his episodes was specifically the Foundling episode, where they go into the whole aspect, the whole detail about one of not Greef Karga. Pre Vizsla, his son is kidnapped by the giant bird thing, and all the Mandalorians have to go and save him. So he actually directed that one, and it's killing me. I can't remember his name, but anyway, the story that he goes into is about all the detailing and all the stuff that, because he had worked with so many of these directors, he figured out the best ways to shoot those episodes and how to do everything with that. And it's really cool to hear that kind of stuff. So I highly recommend to any one of you who are fans of the Mandalorian series to definitely get on Disney Plus and watch the Gallery series. That's the behind the scenes of the Mandalorian. There is so much more detail that goes into how this whole series was done, and the behind the scenes is amazing, especially the parts where Filoni and Favreau are talking about the aspects about working with all the different actors and directors. So I highly recommend checking it out because it is so good. And definitely get out and see the movie. It's fantastic. I'm not going to go into detail, but it's so good. I know the name's going to pop up back for me, so if I yell it out for some reason, that's the reason why. Okay, so moving on to the next fact of the day. Star Wars fact of the day. Mudhorn makes its home in the caves of Arvala 7. The beast uses its horn for defense, and its matted hide caked in mud and woolly withers can even dissipate the concentrated firepower of a blaster bolt at close range. A large omnivorous four-legged land mammal, the mudhorn are only able to lay a single egg per clutch. The exterior of the egg is woolly in the same manner as the skin of the mudhorn, and the interior yolk is yellow. Due to the size of their egg clutch, mudhorns are highly aggressive in protecting their young. A mudhorn encountered and fought Din Djarin, a Mandalorian bounty hunter, as the latter attempted to retrieve an egg from the mudhorn's cave. The Mandalorian was searching for the egg as payment to a group of Jawas. The eggs of mudhorns are considered a delicacy by Jawas. It was ultimately killed with the help of the Force-sensitive child Grogu. The mudhorn later became the signet of the new Mandalorian clan that was founded with Din Djarin and Grogu. So I really wanted to do this because one of the things I like to do with the facts is I always like to include an actual creature. And the Mudhorn was definitely one of the more interesting creatures that they created for this series. I mean, just look at the image here of the Mudhorn. It's got the aspects of, from what I could view of it, I automatically thought it was a woolly rhino. So if you are not familiar with this, me personally, I grew up loving dinosaurs and stuff like that. And not just dinosaurs, but also the Stone Age and the Ice Age and the periods in between. And the Mudhorn very much resembles what a woolly rhino looked like. And woolly rhinos were actually common in the North American state or the North American continent. And just seeing it, the first thing that popped on my head was that it was a woolly rhino. But then when you actually see that, like, there was bones and stuff inside of the cave and stuff like that, you really got the aspect that this wasn't just a plant eater. There was something more. Because also you had to remember that the planet that Mando was on right now was very much similar to that of a desert planet, because it's on, if I remember right, this obviously wasn't on Navarro, Navarro was a different planet altogether. But because this planet was where he found Grogu and he was working his way back, and if you remember, that was the episode where he had gone to get Grogu, but when he got back to his ship, Forever, welcome in, his ship had been torn apart by the Jawas. So, of course, he then goes after the Jawas and he has to fight them off. And unfortunately, he kills a few of the Jawas in the process, so they have to have some kind of agreement where Ugnaught Quill is a huge benefit to Mando because he's able to communicate with them and actually, get his ship finally back. And the one thing they asked for was the egg of a Mudhorn. And I always love that aspect about Star Wars is when you get something that's, you can tell something's good with Star Wars because you not only get unique characters, unique aliens, but you also get unique creatures, unique languages, and all this kind of stuff. It's so universal. And that's one of the great things that I'm so glad that Favreau and Filoni have been keeping true to with Star Wars, specifically with The Mandalorian, is that they're still bringing that aspect of the entire universe, that it's not just a few planets. I mean, when you first got into Star Wars from the original trilogy, there were only a few planets that you encountered, so you didn't know how big this galaxy actually was. Was it just a solar system similar to our solar system, or was it a full galaxy? And the fact that they really go into the details about that and the different atmospheres and the different environments that they're in, and that they design each of the episodes around that, which was something I found out from the behind the scenes, is that they really go into detail about making sure the environments not only are able to be shot in, but also that they are someplace unique that allows for a truly unique story. And the fact that they were able to bring in the Mudhorn, and the interesting thing is that the majority of this creature was CGI, but they obviously had to have a full-grown double that they could use for the actual scenes and stuff like that. But the fact that they came up with this thing that looks like a cross between, the only thing I could compare it to is like between a pig and a woolly rhino, which I just thought was so cool. So I really wanted to give this creature a chance to actually kind of shine and just go into detail about it because it's really an interesting story. Now, the only thing I couldn't find, and I was hoping that Disney had loaded something up, because the interesting thing is that when you have, and this is just from my own personal view, when you have an animal that lays one egg, now based off of that, that means that the clutches have to be in a certain way and in a certain amount so that the species is able to procreate. So obviously on this planet, the Mudhorns are able to procreate in a certain way because they are one of the dominant predators, obviously, because large land predator and being able to do what it does, it must be able to procreate pretty regularly. Now, we don't know what the Mudhorn actually was sex-wise. We don't know if it was male or female. So that was the interesting thing that I thought that they didn't touch on, which was that, because the yolk from the Mudhorn obviously was a delicacy of the Jawas, but you didn't get, from my personal opinion, when I viewed the whole thing, is that they were feasting on the yolk, but there was nothing inside it. I don't know if that was something I noticed, is that there wasn't an embryo inside the egg, which makes me wonder, had it been fertilized yet? So, which made me think, does the mudhorn fertilize its own egg? Or is this something that this was a female and there was a male out there? So, that's something that I thought was really interesting. It is kind of cute. I will say that except for the whole, being assaulting and stuff like that, it's actually, kind of crazy. Yeah, they are really interesting animals. But this was an aspect that I was hoping at some point in time someone would come up with something like that. But I realize that, them coming up with this kind of stuff, it's brand new. So they obviously haven't brought it into a lot more stuff. I'm hoping eventually that, the fans will get behind it. And that's the great thing about Wikipedia.com is a lot of the fans that keep that updated and up to date, they get a lot more detail and stuff in, and they're able to research a lot more. It would be great if, StarWars.com really went into more detail on these things. But my guess is because they want to make sure that everything that's published on StarWars.com is canon. So they're probably not going to go into too much detail about some of the animals because they're a background creature. They serve a purpose in the story, but they don't want to give too much away about it because if they have to go back to it, they want to be able to, work with it. So I was hoping they were going to go into a little bit more detail, especially because it's the signa of Din Djarin's clan. So I was a little disappointed that I wasn't able to find more. I would have gone into a lot more detail if I could have, but there's just a limited amount of material. The majority of the Wikipedia definition just went through a recap of what happened in the episode. So a lot of the information I got, I went off of just my personal information, but also the stuff that I got from both StarWars.com and Wikipedia.com. So the research on some of these things, I'm not able to do a whole lot. Randall, welcome in. But I try to do as best I can with the information I've got. Like some other things, like I'm able to research and I'm able to get a whole bunch of detail, and I have to narrow it down just to the stuff that really wants to focus on. Whereas other things, I can go into massive amounts of details if I wanted to, but I try to limit it to a certain amount because I'm only limited to a certain amount of text that I can use. Okay, so let's move on to the next fact of the day. Star Wars fact of the day. Kelleran Beck is a highly skilled Jedi Knight, also known as the Sabered Hand, a human male who served in the Jedi Order. He served on the starship Athelia, which was a Jedi training facility. Beck worked in the Jedi Creche, tending to the younglings of the temple. In addition, he supervised Padawans as they went through their Jedi trials. Beck was proficient at Jar Kari, being able to wield 2 lightsabers at once. And though he was a highly skilled warrior, he chose to devote his life to teaching younglings in the way of the Force. Kelleran Beck was instrumental in saving young Grogu from the Jedi Temple on the terrible night of Order 66. Now, I will say this was probably the most wonderful thing that they could have done in The Mandalorian. And a lot of you who are fans of The Mandalorian or are fans of Star Wars know who this actor is that played Kelleran Beck. It's Ahmed Best. Now, for those of you who are listening to me and they don't know who this is the actor who also played Jar Jar Binks. Now, the big thing about that is that, and some of you may know this, is that Jar Jar Binks has been received very negatively by a lot of toxic fans. And Ahmed Best received a lot of hate over time for the character, and social media was never kind to him. Michael, welcome in. So the fact that Favreau and Filoni thought so well as to recast him in this role, and especially that they used a character that had already been established and that Ahmed Best was connected to, I thought was superbly cool. And the fact that they gave this character such a unique touch, Michelle, welcome in, that he not only was one of the survivors of the night of Order 66, but that he also saved Grogu. Like, he was the one that actually got Grogu off Coruscant. And the whole scene in Mandalorian where he has to use the speeder to get away from the High Guard and the 501st at the Jedi Temple, I just thought that was so cool. And the real interesting thing, and I keep hoping that we're going to get more from one of Grogu's flashbacks. Now, I've heard rumors that Mandalorian Grogu is definitely the one movie that's out, but there are of Mandalorian and Grogu. Now, whether or not that is going to manifest as a movie or if it's going to manifest as another, streaming show, we'll have to wait and see. I think a lot of the materials about that and reason why it hasn't been announced yet is because they're waiting to see how Ahsoka season 2 is received. Because I have a feeling that there is going to be a lot revealed and a lot happening in the next season of Ahsoka. I'm not going to give any predictions because I know it's going to happen, but the reason why people hated the character so much, honestly, for me, is because it's a combination of things. The first thing is that the fans that grew up with the original trilogy were expecting the movies to mature with them. And that is a real problem that a lot of fans need to stop thinking that Star Wars is only for devoted fans from the original trilogy. It's not. Star Wars is for everybody. The original trilogy was PG or PG-13, okay? It was meant for kids to see. It was designed so that kids could actually watch it. And there have been more than enough explanations for this throughout the entire run of Star Wars that the entire concept of Star Wars was based on the hero's journey, which is a story that kids have been reading about in school and in storybooks for generations. So it's really frustrating that so many of the toxic fans of the original trilogy cannot see the prequel trilogies, the sequel trilogies as part of Star Wars because it doesn't fit into their view of what it should be. Michael, welcome in. And it's unfortunate because Ahmed Best was a fantastic actor. And for the role that he took on, Jar Jar, yes, was a lot of comic relief. And I have no problem with the fact that Jar Jar was in the series. Granted, when I first saw him, I didn't understand what his character was actually for, but it made sense for the plot of the story because he was the one that allowed them to connect with the Gungans and to bring peace between the Naboo and the Gungans so that they could combine forces to save the planet. It made sense to me. Plot-wise, it made perfect sense. Jar Jar was the link that between them to allow them to combine together and to create peace. It made sense. It worked. Was he the comic relief that we needed? Not really. Usually C-3PO and R2-D2 would handle that, but obviously C-3PO hadn't been built, which we found out. So obviously when he was on there, C-3PO wasn't as big of a comic relief as Jar Jar was. Honestly, Jar Jar was funnier. And in my opinion, there were a lot of scenes that, honestly, I'm glad that they did the way they did with Jar Jar because the movie was honestly, there was a lot of dark parts of that. It was nice to have some levity. And granted, yes, Jar Jar was kind of silly. And that's the whole point, is that it was supposed to be silly. When you're watching the movie, there's supposed to be little kids in the theater. They were going to look at Jar Jar and the funny stuff he was doing. They were going to laugh. I'm sorry, but it was designed for kids. There's the adult themes. Obviously, Lucas knew who he was playing the movie to, so he put in something for the kids. They were going to watch because of the lightsabers. They were going to watch because of the action. They were going to watch because of all the space battles and all that, but they wanted to see something funny and characters that were funny. So, of course, he had to put something in that was Jar Jar. I mean, you should expect to see that. Now, unfortunately, there are aspects of fans that they don't like when things change, and that's just part of generation aspects. People have trouble dealing with change. So unfortunately, Jar Jar was hit with so much hate, so much dislike, and unfortunately Ahmed Best, who played the character, really got hit with that. He was I don't like to really think about how badly he was treated because it just depresses me. And I've already got depression, anxiety, PTSD, and stuff to deal with. So I feel exceedingly bad for Ahmed Best just because he went through that. And me being a person who was bullied for the longest time when I was a kid, I understand what he was going through. Granted, I did not go through the same thing he did, and I will never try to explain or express that what my experience was the same as his, but he received a lot of hate that he did not deserve. But the great thing is that he was given a new role that not only original fans would love, but so many would be able to go through. And that we could actually see him in a different way and see his acting capability in something beyond the comic relief. And that's what I really liked about the Caloran Beck character. Now, I unfortunately had not encountered Caloran Beck when he first came out. Apparently, he was part of an additional story phase that I'm not sure it has to do with not Galaxy's Edge, but another entertainment thing for kids, which I'm guessing was through StarWars.com or something like that. I never experienced it, so I didn't know who Caloran Beck was, but I knew Ahmed Best. So when he showed up on Mandalore, I was like, oh my God! I was totally excited for that scene. And the fact that he was not only, a Jedi, but he was a dual-wielding Jedi. I mean, that's super cool. I mean, you rarely see how many dual-wielding Jedi there were at the time. And the fact that he was one, it was like, whoa, this guy is cool. And the fact that he took on all those 501st troopers by himself and he didn't get killed, he didn't take a single shot, that was awesome. So I was really happy about that. And I'm really hoping we get more of him in the future, because we know we haven't gotten the whole story of Grogu's escape. And this is something that I always reference back to when I'm chatting with fans, is that you always have to remember we get a little bit more detail about what Grogu experienced from Ahsoka when she first meets him in the episode The Jedi, where she actually mentally shares space with Grogu, and she says that when he escaped Coruscant, his memories get dark and blurry, which is because he's experiencing trauma. And me personally, from someone who has experienced trauma, obviously not the same as Grogu, I experienced my own version of trauma. There are certain memories that are changed because of your experiences. Through therapy, you can learn and see and experience those memories again, but how they actually happened. And that's something that we see Grogu going through. Now, granted, Grogu is 50 years old, so he has been alive. But you have to remember, Grogu is still a child. He's a 50-year-old child. So even though he has been along for a long time and has experienced things, his lifelong experience is not the same as everybody else's. Because he hasn't even learned to speak yet. He's still learning how to control the elements of the Force. But he's still a child. And he's been alive for over 50 years. So his experiences are completely different from anybody else, any other child, which is the reason why I really like the aspect that they're going with in Mandalorian, because it's a very wolf and cub kind of aspect, which you should look that up. That is a story archetype that you should definitely look up. Wolf and cub is basically a warrior who travels with a baby, and the baby experiences the trauma and the experiences of what the warrior goes through. And this is a traumatic experience, but it also changes who the child is, and the child has to mature earlier than it should. And this is an interesting aspect about Grogu, is that we're actually seeing Wolf and Cub. Thank you so much for referencing that. Yes. And it's really that aspect that we get from Grogu, that he is steadily, the more time he spends with the other Mandalorians, the more his trauma is coming back to the surface. And we're getting to experience that. But we have to remember that we're getting to see that, but nobody else is. And that's the interesting thing, that Din is one of the few people that understands that Grogu went through something, because Ahsoka imparted that information to him, so that he actually knows that something went wrong. And that's also the thing that he's noticed, is that he tends to be afraid, that he's fearful of doing things. He's afraid to even show that he can use the Force. But around Din, he feels comfortable doing that because he doesn't have to fear Din. He has to be fearful of everybody else, obviously, but he doesn't have to worry about that. And so the more Grogu goes through his trauma, and the more he re-exposes himself to it as he goes through his experiences, we're probably going to find out more about Caloran Beck. And I'm really interested to find out where his story goes. Now, I'm hoping they don't try to do a comic book or something like that, because I'm worried that that story will get taken away. Because that's the thing right now, is a lot of stuff that's put out in Marvel comic stuff. Not that there's anything wrong with that. I love Dark Horse, I love Marvel, and I love the fact that they're putting out series, and I've been reading them. But the problem is those could easily be decanonized. So I'm hoping Caloran Beck stays in the cinematic aspect, and we'll find out his story as it goes. And I'm hoping we get a longer thing with Grogu re-experiencing his trauma, and we find out what actually happened, because there's a lot that happened for Grogu to end up on Slavarda 7 and going, because we don't know where exactly he went. I mean, he's obviously in the Naboo cruiser, but we don't know where the cruiser went. Did it go to Naboo? Did it go to somewhere else? Because obviously, Beck needed support because he was going to be pursued. So it's really going to be interesting when we find that out. He sounds a little, maybe I'm afraid to do a lot of things, especially if I know. Yeah, exactly. We all have that kind of thing. It's performance anxiety, and doing anything. Kids go through that. I mean, you see it in almost every ball field, soccer field, grammar school performance and stuff like that, where a kid forgets his lines or he drops something in a performance or something like that, or a kid doesn't do well in an exam because he's nervous about that kind of thing. Heck, my kid goes through that. I went through that as a kid. I had terrible test anxiety when I was a kid. And that's something that all kids go through. The difference is for Grogu, he's experiencing all that stuff, and we're getting to see his trauma take form. And, there's aspects, this was something that we got in the first season, where he lashed out in hatred against Cara Dune when she and Mando were having a simple, friendly arm wrestling match. And he started force choking her. And he had to stop her, and it was like, Cara obviously was upset about it because she just felt like she was dying. So you never know how Grogu's going to change over time. And I think it's going to be really interesting to see how that's going to happen. And this, I will reference this again, the gallery behind the scenes, there is a lot of detail that goes into the casting and the way the actors interact with the child. Because, as you know, for the practical effects, originally Filoni was planning on making Grogu CG. But because of the traditions of Star Wars in using practical effects, Grogu was and is still being used as an actual puppet with puppeteers, similar to the way Yoda was. But obviously some of his moves and stuff like that, like his leaping and stuff like that, that obviously has to be CG. And you will see some of that in Mandalorian Grogu. I'm not going to go into detail, but you will see that. And it's really interesting, the whole dynamic of going from practical effect to CG effects with him. It's really cool, and I can't wait to see where they go as it moves forward. And I'm hoping we're going to get a lot more with that. Excuse me. So, okay, let's move on to the next fact of the day. Operation Nightfall. Star Wars fact of the day, Operation Nightfall was one of the first military engagements in the Great Jedi Purge. Following an attempt of arresting Supreme Chancellor Sheev Palpatine, Darth Vader led the 501st Legion onto the Jedi Temple. While thousands of Jedi were purged across the galaxy as a result of Order 66, the new Sith Lord and his Legion invaded and occupied the temple. During the assault, Jedi Caloran Beck fled the burning temple with Jedi initiate Grogu in an escape from Coruscant. In the aftermath of the attack, which saw the murder of numerous Jedi, including younglings at Vader's hands, the Sith attempted to lure the survivors into a trap via a beacon signaling all Jedi to return to the temple. However, their plan was thwarted by the efforts of Grand Master Yoda and Jedi Master Obi-Wan Kenobi, who reprogrammed the beacon to warn all Jedi to stay away from Coruscant. With the fall of the Jedi Temple and the near annihilation of the entire Jedi Order, Lord Sidious, issued the proclamation of the New Order, dissolving the Galactic Republic and replacing it with a new regime, the Galactic Empire, ruled by himself as Emperor. Now, I really wanted to include this because we got a lot more detail about Order 66 and Operation Nightfall, which, for some of you who are curious, the reason why it's spelled Nightfall with a K is because it's the fall of the Jedi Knights, which is referenced from the original trilogy with Obi-Wan saying it was the hunt down and destroy the Jedi Knights. They actually hadn't gone into like Jedi Masters and stuff like that at that time. So as far as we, the fans, were concerned, they were all Jedi Knights. They were referred to as master, as in master and teach, master and student. But whether or not there was an actual rank of Jedi Master, that was not really known, other than we get it in Empire Strikes Back, where he's referred to, where Yoda is referred to as a Jedi Master. And that was the first time we actually got that, was in Empire Strikes Back. So I really wanted to touch on that, because someone had actually, when I actually posted this up, someone actually got a little confused about that and asked why it used night, and he thought it was something relating to it being done at night. I was like, no. That's not why it's like that. So it was a friendly mistake. It wasn't a big deal. But I really wanted to cover this because a lot of the recent shows that we've gotten, from Obi-Wan Kenobi to Bad Batch and Clone Wars, we really got to see the effects of Order 66 and how it happened. But we didn't get a whole lot of details about what happened at the Jedi Temple. We got a few cutscenes from, not cutscenes, but a few scenes in Obi-Wan Kenobi where we see what happens to a group of younglings when they're attacked, and we also get the scenes of what happens to Grogu. And this is something that I think is really interesting, that we actually get these scenes. And the really great thing is that there are so many fans out there who have actually edited together all these cutscenes and stuff like that from all the different series. So we actually have a scene by scene event of all these things happening. And also they tied in, of course, Jedi Fallen Order, or Jedi. I can't remember, unfortunately, the video game. It slipped out of my. Once again, I had it in my head and I unfortunately lost it. But yeah, so they have edited the scenes together so we actually can see what actually happened. And it's really interesting, because I think it's super cool that we're finally getting all these scenes that have to do with what's going on during Order 66. And this also references back to the fact that you have to remember that the clones that are doing these executions, they don't understand the aspect that so many don't know that the clones had no choice in them committing these orders. They didn't do it voluntarily. They were forced to do it. And the majority of them, when you find out afterwards, they didn't want to do it. But because of the chip that was in their heads, they had no choice in the matter. But the fact that, Cody, who still had his chip in his head, he actually expressed regret. And the majority of the clones, especially the veteran clones, they expressed regret in attacking their Jedi. I mean, even Wolf, he expressed fear for what they did, because he knew he was going to be held accountable for that. And he was afraid what would happen when the Jedi found out about it. And this is something that I always like to reference, is that when you see something like this image of the clones, gunning down the Jedi, you have to think those aren't clones. I mean, they are clones, but they're not who we know they are. These are basically, their choices have been taken away and they've been turned into puppets. And they're basically just doing the will of the Emperor and the Sith. And it's just disheartening to know that, to look at these guys, knowing that they are living beings who were created to defend the Republic and to fight with the Jedi against the Separatists and the Sith. And this is what the result was. They are forced to shoot down the people that they had served with for so long during the Clone Wars. And basically everything that they were, their entire persona, has changed and altered. And I always want to reference that, because it's something that a lot of people just don't realize, and it's really sad. I know it is heartbreaking. I understand. I get that you're okay with me spoiling stuff. The whole thing is that I know there's other people who might be watching that might be upset about it. So I don't like to bring this stuff up, just because I don't want to spoil it for anybody who's catching stuff. So that's the reason why I haven't brought it up. But thank you for being okay with it. We could chat about it later if you want to. Okay, so we're going to move on now to the last fact. So, Star Wars fact of the day. The Naboo N1 Starfighter Protecting space around Naboo is this sleek design that exemplifies the philosophy and art and function of Naboo technology, developed exclusively by the Theed Palace Space Vessel Engineering Corps. Buffed chromium finishes of the craft's forward surfaces glinted in the sun for flybys and parades and represented the royalty of Naboo, complementing the Royal Starship. Excuse me. The N1's chromium stood in stark contrast to its overall yellow finish. Its twin radial G-type engines are capped in gleaming chrome, and the trail-long, delicate-looking funnels behind the ship single pilot compartment. Behind the pilot sits a standard astromech droid plugged into its abbreviated ventral fed socket, which requires the droid to compress slightly in order to fit within the vessel's curves. The fighter features twin blaster cannons, twin-fired torpedo launchers, and a capable automatic pilot feature. A Nubian Monarch C4 hyperdrive engine made it one of the few starfighters at the time that could travel at light speed without a hyperspace ring. The N1 proved itself a superior starfighter in the Battle of Naboo. During the invasion, the pilots of Bravo Squadron flew the N1 during the final assault against the droid control ship Vuntam Pala. Outnumbered by the Trade Federation's Vulture starfighters, the N1's speed and maneuverability gave the pilots a distinct advantage over the droids, leading to victory. Years later, after the Galactic Civil War, the Mandalorian bounty hunter Din Djarin acquired a modified N1 starfighter following the destruction of his previous starship, the Razor Quest. Djarin and engineer Pele Moro constructed the ship at Hangar 3-5 in Mos Eisley, Tatooine. So I really wanted to touch on this because this was one of the most unique fighters that we got in Star Wars, because it's really a unique design. It's not like anything we experienced in the original trilogy. It was completely unique. And the really interesting thing, there's a reason why you don't see any other starfighters like this throughout the galaxy, is that this was an example of a fighter craft that was designed specifically by a planet. I believe Abel may have built one out of those Legos. I know they were available. I actually, I have my own version. I purchased the Mandalorian version, and I actually have it built downstairs, but I have it in a case. So I was thinking about I might show it tonight, but I was worried it might be an issue, so I didn't bother with it. But I really like the design of this, and it's an interesting fact that I've researched on this, because I was thinking to myself when I'm watching the movie, is how because Bravo Squadron wasn't that big. I mean, if you counted how many fighters actually went into battle, there were only maybe like 20 fighters at the most, 15 to 20 fighters. So it was like maybe, a couple flights that were able to go into that battle. Whereas the droid starship had hundreds of Vulture fighters. So they should have completely overwhelmed the Naboo starfighters. But this is the interesting aspect, is that the Naboo starfighter, the N1, was extremely fast and maneuverable and was designed specifically for that capability. And that's the reason why these fighters were able to go toe-to-toe with all those Vulture fighters. The difference is that they weren't able to do the damage to the ship that they needed to in order to destroy it, which I thought was really cool, that they were still, able to get in and do the damage to the fighters, as well as stay alive long enough to actually attempt to launch attacks against the ship itself. But you really saw in the battle that few of the N1s were able to actually do any heavy damage, because again, these are starfighters against a massive ship, and it wasn't until Anakin actually flew inside the ship and was able to blow it up. And I just thought it was super cool that the details about this, I didn't know this until I actually researched it, but we get an example of this from the N1 that Din Djarin is flying, is that it is an extremely fast and maneuverable starship. And the fact that it was able to move and outmaneuver even TIE fighters, Imperial interceptors, were able to be outmaneuvered by an N1 starfighter, which I did not know was possible. Because, as far as I understood by my own research, the TIE interceptor was one of the fastest and most maneuverable starfighters in Star Wars. Yet the N1 was not only able to outmaneuver one, but several of them. It was able to outfly, outmaneuver, and outgun them. And I thought that was so cool. And it's an aspect that you really had to realize, because this was something that was represented in Clone Wars, that the Vulture fighters that the Separatists were using, those of course are droids, so they have brains that are designed specifically to do maneuvers that a mortal pilot could not do. Specifically, and this is only because I've researched this, is that when you're flying in an aircraft and you have to go against G-forces, that means the pressure of gravity pulling against you as you're flying, you can lose consciousness. And if you've ever seen any kind of fighter movie or something like that, you find out about pilots blacking out because of the G-forces that they have to deal with, that they've had to design specific flight suits that constrict in order to pin the blood vessels against your body so that you don't black out. And this is something that is even more so in space because there's no inertia in space. So when you make a sharp turn, gravity does hit you. But if you did a snap roll in space, you're doing it at twice the speed that you would be doing it in atmosphere, which means the G-force would be twice as strong, which they would knock you out. And if you're trying to do any kind of maneuver when you're in a dogfight and you lose consciousness, you're a sitting duck. You would get blown out of the sky in a second. Abby, welcome in. So that was the interesting thing that I liked reading about this. And you can actually read a little bit more on this on Wikipedia.com, because they really go into detail that the flight suits that the members of Bravo Squadron were wearing were these long trench coats. And the reason for that is built into those coats was a part of the uniform that would allow them to withstand the G-forces when flying these fighters. Because again, these were not fighters that were designed and brought into Naboo. These were designed on planet. The Naboo people designed these fighters. They were designed on Naboo. And so that's the reason why they are so unique. And like Pele said in the episode of Mandalorian, they were exclusive to the Royal Guard of Naboo. So that's the reason why you don't really see Naboo starfighters throughout the galaxy, because they're exclusive to just Naboo. So even if they were sold off, they were designed specifically for the Naboo people, which is the reason why it's really unique and rare that Pele was able to get access to it. Granted, the majority of it was torn apart and they had to custom rebuild it. But still, when you think about, if you look at this and then think about what Mando's looked like, it was a heavily modification, which means it was able to move twice as fast as the original designers, because this was designed specifically for showing off aerial capability as well as being, designed for the Royal Guard. And the version that we see that Din finally has is much sleeker, much faster, and even has an additional booster that the original did not have. But the speed of the N1 was well known, which is the reason why they were able to outmaneuver the Vulture starfighters, which I think is super cool. And it makes a lot more sense for me now that I've researched it, of why the N1s actually were able to go toe to toe with those Vulture starfighters and not lose. Because when you see in Revenge of the Sith, when the ARC fighters are going up against the Vulture droids, they were getting taken down left and right. And the same thing was happening in the TV series of Clone Wars. You regularly saw the Vulture starfighters taking out the clone starfighters. And I was always curious as, well, why didn't the N1s have that much trouble? Now I know it's because the N1s were so fast, they were actually able to outmaneuver the droids, which is really, it was supposed to be the other way around. So I really wanted to touch on that because this is a really cool ship. And the fact that they brought it back for Mandalorian and we got so much more information about the design of the fighter and how it works, I just thought that was super cool. And I wanted to make sure I shared that with everybody because it's really cool. Okay, so that is all I have. That's the end of the facts for the week.